At my father's birthday, my stepbrother announced, "Dad and I are going into business together, family only." He looked right at me. Dad nodded. I stood to leave. As I reached the door, I said, "Good luck without the investor. I was the silent partner funding your last 3 ventures." The heavy crystal tumbler of sparkling water sat untouched near my right hand, as the ambient noise of the Capitol Grill in downtown Houston hummed around us, a steady drone of expensive silverware hitting china and the murmur of deals being struck over Wagyu beef. It was October 14th, my father's 65th birthday, a milestone that we had marked with a dinner reservation that cost more than the first car I ever bought. At the head of the table sat my father, Robert, looking flushed and pleased, his ego inflated by the attention and the 3 glasses of Cabernet Sauvignon he had consumed. To his right sat his wife of 15 years, Sheila, and to his left sat her son, my stepbrother, Jason. I sat across from them, the biological daughter, the quiet observer, the one who had arrived on time and paid the valet, while Jason had arrived 20 minutes late, making a show of complaining about the traffic in his leased BMW M4. The dynamic was familiar, a worn groove in the record of our family history, where Jason was the protagonist and I was the supporting character who handled the logistics. We were waiting for the dessert course, a flourish of cheesecake and espresso, when Jason tapped his spoon against his wine glass, the sharp metallic sound cutting through the conversation. He stood up, smoothing the lapels of a suit that was too shiny and slightly too tight around the shoulders, a garment that screamed aspiration rather than attainment. "I have an announcement," Jason said, his voice projecting with the confidence of a man who has never truly failed because he has never truly risked his own capital. He placed a hand on my father's shoulder, a gesture that felt both possessive and performative. "Dad and I have been talking. We've decided it's time to really build a legacy. We are launching a new venture next month, R&J Logistics. Dad is coming out of retirement to be the chairman and I'll be the CEO. We're going to disrupt the regional supply chain." He paused for effect, looking around the table with a smug grin before his eyes locked onto mine. "And the best part is," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial register that was meant to be exclusive, "we're keeping it tight, family only, no outsiders, no corporate interference, just the men of the house getting it done." The silence that followed was absolute. The phrase "family only" hung in the air, a toxic cloud that explicitly redlined me out of the lineage. I looked at my father, expecting him to correct the statement, to acknowledge that his daughter, who was a senior vice president of operations at a Fortune 500 logistics firm, might have some value, or at the very least was part of the family. But Robert didn't look at me. He looked up at Jason with a gaze of adoration that he had never once bestowed upon me in 34 years. He nodded. "That's right," my father said, patting Jason's hand. "It's time we took control. No more answering to people who don't understand our vision." The betrayal was physical, a cold spike driving into my chest. It wasn't just the exclusion from the business. I had no desire to work with Jason, whose business acumen was limited to reading headlines on LinkedIn. It was the erasure. Family only meant Robert and Jason. I was the anomaly. I was the outsider he referred to. I looked at Sheila, who was beaming, clapping her hands softly. I looked at the table where the bill for this dinner, estimated at $850, would inevitably land near my plate because Jason forgot his wallet, or Dad is the birthday boy. The tumblers of the lock clicked into place. For a decade, I had played the game. I had been the dutiful daughter, the safety net, the silent fixer. I had allowed them to believe that their luck in business was a product of their genius. I had done it to buy my father's love, to keep him solvent, so he wouldn't look at me with disappointment. But as I watched him nod at the son, who shared none of his blood, but all of his arrogance, I realized the transaction was fraudulent. I had been paying for a commodity that didn't exist. I stood up. The movement was slow, controlled, and final. I picked up my clutch, a vintage Chanel that I had bought with my own bonus check 3 years ago. "Where are you going?" Jason asked, his smirk faltering slightly. "We haven't ordered cake. I'm leaving," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the tremor that usually accompanied my confrontations with them. "I think you have the celebration covered." I walked around the table. My father finally looked at me, his eyes narrowing with that familiar mix of confusion and irritation he reserved for my displays of autonomy. "Sit down, Sarah," he said. "Don't make a scene. We're celebrating." "I am celebrating," I replied. "I'm celebrating the launch of R&J Logistics." I paused at the door of the private dining room, my hand on the brass handle. I turned back to look at them one last time, a tableau of entitlement frozen under the warm restaurant lighting. "Good luck," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the ambient jazz. "Good luck without the investor. I was the silent partner funding your last 3 ventures. There won't be a fourth." I saw the confusion ripple across Jason's face, followed by a laugh of disbelief. "What are you talking about?" he scoffed. "Our investor was Argus Capital, a private equity firm." "I own Argus Capital," I said. "It's a single-member LLC. Check the registration documents, Jason. Argus's was the name of the dog I had when I was 6, the one Dad made me give away." I didn't wait for the realization to land. I walked out. I walked through the main dining room past the host stand and out into the humid Houston night. I handed my ticket to the valet, my hands steady as I retrieved a $20 bill for the tip. As I waited for my car, my phone began to buzz. First Jason, then Dad, then the landline from the house. I silenced the device and tossed it onto the passenger seat of my Audi A6. The hook had been set. The crisis was immediate, but the devastation I had just unleashed was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was the culmination of 10 years of forensic enabling, and the sudden violent withdrawal of that support would be catastrophic. This was the context, the hidden history that turned my exit from a tantrum into a tactical nuclear strike. To understand why I was the silent partner, you have to understand the pathology of my family. My father, Robert, was a man who believed he was a titan of industry because he had successfully managed a mid-sized hardware store in the 90s before selling it for a modest profit. He equated luck with skill. When he married Sheila, Jason came as part of the package. Jason was loud, charismatic, and allergic to actual work. He was the son. My father always wanted a mirror that reflected his own unearned confidence. I, on the other hand, was the nerd. I studied supply chain management and forensic accounting. I worked 18-hour days. I climbed the corporate ladder with bloody fingernails. I made money, real money, but I never talked about it because my father found female ambition unbecoming. He preferred to see me as his little helper. So, when Jason had his first big idea in 2016, a craft brewery concept called Brewhaven that needed $150,000 in seed capital, I watched them struggle to find investors. My father was going to mortgage his house, the house I grew up in, to fund it. I couldn't let him lose his home. I couldn't let him be destitute. So I called my attorney Marcus Thorne, a man with 30 years of experience in corporate law and a shark-like grin. Set up a shell, I told him. Argus Capital. Make it look like boutique private equity. Contact Jason. Offer him the money. Standard equity deal. But my name appears nowhere. Marcus had warned me. You are lighting money on fire, Sarah, he had said, his voice gravelly over the phone. This boy is a fool. You will never see a return. I know, I had replied. I'm paying for my father's peace of mind. And so Argus Capital was born. Jason felt like a genius because a firm had backed him. The brewery failed in 18 months due to mismanagement and health code violations. I lost the $150,000. I wrote it off. I didn't say a word. I sat at Thanksgiving dinner and listened to Jason blame the market saturation and the regulatory environment. My father nodded and said, "You'll get them next time, son." And there was a next time. In 2019, it was a tech startup called Cryptic Solutions, a blockchain inventory app that didn't actually have a blockchain. He needed $220,000. Again, my father reached for his retirement accounts. Again, I stepped in. Argus Capital funded round one. Jason bought a Rolex and rented a WeWork office. The app never launched. The money evaporated. I lost $220,000. Then came the real estate flip in 2022. A dilapidated Victorian on Elm Street that Jason was going to restore and flip for double. He needed $340,000 for the purchase and renovation. By this point, I was exhausted. I was angry. But the pattern was an addiction. I was the enabler protecting my father from the reality of his stepson's incompetence. I funded it. Argus Capital cut the check. Jason hired unlicensed contractors, ignored permits, and gutted the load-bearing walls. The city shut the project down. The house sat rotting. I eventually had Argus Capital foreclose on the property and sold the shell for a loss of $200,000. In total, I had poured nearly $600,000 into the black hole of Jason's ego. I had kept my father comfortable. I had kept the illusion alive. I had done it because I thought that eventually they would see me. I thought that if I kept the sky from falling, they would eventually look up and thank the person holding it. But tonight at the Capitol Grill, I realized they didn't care about the sky. They only cared that they were the ones standing in the sun. The family-only comment wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a statement of doctrine. They believed they were self-made men. They believed Argus Capital was just a smart investor who saw their potential. They had no idea that Argus Capital was the daughter they forgot to invite to the planning meetings. As I drove onto I-10, the city lights blurring past me, the sorrow began to metabolize into a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't just an aggrieved sister anymore. I was the majority shareholder in their failure, and I was about to call in the debts. I arrived at my condo in the Heights, a space that was minimalist, ordered, and paid for in cash. I poured myself a glass of Sancerre and walked to my home office. I sat down at my desk and woke up my monitors. The glow of the screens illuminated the room, a sanctuary of data and truth. I logged into the secure portal for Argus Capital. I pulled up the files for R&J Logistics. I knew about this venture before they announced it because Jason had already sent a pitch deck to the Argus Capital general email address 3 days ago. He was asking for $500,000 in seed funding. He had listed proprietary algorithm and strategic partnerships as assets. I opened the pitch deck. It was garbage, clip art, and buzzwords. But under the financials tab, he had listed committed capital of $200,000 from personal savings. I knew for a fact Jason didn't have $200,000, which meant my father had likely liquidated his IRA or taken a home equity line of credit on the house I had saved 3 times over. They were going all in, and they were counting on Argus Capital to provide the rest. My phone was still buzzing on the desk. I looked at the screen. A text from Jason. "Stop joking. It's not funny. Pick up." Another from Dad. "Sarah, call me immediately. You are embarrassing yourself." Embarrassing myself. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. I opened my email client. I composed a new message. Recipient, Jason Reynolds, CEO, R&J Logistics. Subject, seed funding application. Argus Capital. The body of the email was pre-written in my head, a template of rejection I had used in my corporate life 1,000 times, but never with this much satisfaction. Dear Mr. Reynolds, regarding your recent application for seed capital for R&J Logistics, please be advised that Argus Capital is suspending all new investment activities effective immediately. Furthermore, due to a restructuring of our portfolio, we are initiating a full audit of all prior ventures funded under your management, including Brewhaven, Cryptic Solutions, and the Elm Street project. We have reason to believe that funds were misappropriated for personal use. Our legal team will be in contact regarding the recovery of assets. Regards, the management. I didn't send it yet. I wanted to wait. I wanted them to sweat. I wanted the silence to stretch until they were terrified. I looked at the clock. It was 9:15 p.m. They were probably still at the restaurant arguing over the bill, realizing that without me there to forget my card on the table, they actually had to pay. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus Thorne. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep or whiskey. Sarah, it's late. Wake up, Marcus, I said, my voice steady and cold. I'm done lighting money on fire. I want to execute the clawback clauses. All of them. The clawback clauses? Marcus sounded awake now. Sarah, those were poison pills. We put them in the contracts just in case you ever wanted to nuke the relationship. You said you'd never use them. It involves forensic audits, piercing the corporate veil, personal liability. It will bankrupt Jason. And if your father co-signed any of those loans, it will hit him too. I know, I said. They wanted to be in business together, family only. I'm just giving them the full experience. Okay, Marcus said, the rustle of sheets audible on the line. I'll draft the notices. When do you want them served? Tomorrow morning, I said. 9 a.m. I want the courier to meet them at their office, which I assume is Dad's dining room table. Understood. Welcome back to sanity, Sarah. I hung up. I took a sip of wine. The discovery phase was about to begin. They thought Argus Capital was a benevolent angel investor. They were about to learn that Argus was a 100-eyed giant who saw everything. I opened the file labeled Evidence on my desktop. I had kept everything. Every receipt Jason had submitted for business dinners that were actually dates. Every invoice for consulting fees that went to his friends. Every withdrawal from the Brewhaven account that matched the price of his BMW lease payments. I had tracked it all. Not because I planned to use it, but because I am an auditor, and I cannot ignore a discrepancy. The data was there. The proof of embezzlement was irrefutable. Jason hadn't just failed, he had stolen, and my father had cheered him on. I looked at the photo on my desk, a picture of me and my dad when I was 10, standing in front of his hardware store. He looked proud then. I realized now that he was proud because I was small and quiet and looking up at him. He didn't know how to be proud of a daughter who could look him in the eye and buy and sell his dreams. The nostalgia evaporated. I dragged the photo into the drawer. It was time to work. The family-only business was about to get its first hostile takeover. The morning sun that filtered into my home office in the Heights was sharp and unforgiving, much like the headache I imagined was currently splitting my stepbrother Jason's skull. It was 8:58 a.m. I sat in my ergonomic Herman Miller Aeron chair, a cup of black coffee steaming on the coaster to my right. On my left monitor was the live tracking map for Priority Legal Services. A small blue dot was moving slowly down the street where my father lived, the house I grew up in, now mortgaged to the hilt to fund Jason's delusions. I watched the dot stop. I watched the status update. Asterisk. Arrived at destination. Asterisk. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus Thorne. It's time, I said. Execute the freeze on the accounts. Consider it done, Marcus replied, the sound of keyboard clacking audible in the background. And, Sarah, I hope you're ready. When a rat realizes the trap is shut, it doesn't beg. It bites. I'm counting on it, I said. Biting leaves dental records. It makes the evidence easier to verify. I hung up and turned my attention to the center monitor. This was the discovery phase. For years, I had treated the losses from Argus Capital as sunk costs, the price of admission to my family. I had never looked too closely at the granular details of how Jason had burned through $600,000 because I hadn't wanted to know. I had preferred the fiction that he was just incompetent. Now, I needed to prove he was criminal. I opened the archived ledger for Brewhaven LLC, the brewery project from 2016. I had the raw bank data because, as the primary investor, Argus Capital had administrative viewing rights Jason had likely forgotten about because he never read the contracts. I began to cross-reference the expense reports with the bank withdrawals. The first discrepancy appeared in the equipment acquisition column. On the 12th of March 2017, there was a wire transfer for $14,500 to a vendor listed as Bavarian Hops and Fermenters. It sounded legitimate, but I am a forensic accountant. I don't trust sounds. I trust tax ID numbers. I ran the vendor's EIN through the state registry. It didn't exist. I ran the receiving bank account number. It traced back to a holding company called Prestige Leasing, a luxury car dealership in West Houston. I pulled Jason's credit report, which I had legal access to as a guarantor on the original loan. On the 14th of March 2017, 2 days after the transfer, Jason had leased a BMW 5 Series. The down payment was exactly $14,500. He hadn't bought fermentation tanks. He had bought a status symbol to drive to the brewery he was bankrupting. I continued digging. The Cryptic Solutions ledger from 2019 was even messier. There were monthly withdrawals of $4,200 labeled server hosting and cloud storage. That was an astronomical fee for a pre-revenue app with 0 users. I traced the merchant ID. It wasn't Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud. It was a high-end property management firm in Austin. I cross-referenced the dates. The payments coincided perfectly with the rental of a luxury loft apartment on Rainey Street. Jason had told us he was traveling to Austin for tech conferences. In reality, he was using my money to maintain a bachelor pad 2 hours away while living rent-free in my father's guest house. The rage I felt wasn't hot. It was cold and mathematical. Every entry was a betrayal, quantified. $650 for a client dinner at a strip club, $2,100 for office supplies. That was actually a transaction at an Apple store for 2 iPhones and an iPad Pro. He had treated Argus Capital, he had treated Times Me Times as an infinite resource, a magical wallet that refilled itself on demand. At 9:14 a.m., my phone exploded. It wasn't a text this time. It was a call from my father. I let it ring. I watched the screen light up with his photo, a picture taken at a barbecue 5 years ago where he looked happy. I let it go to voicemail. Then Jason called. Then Sheila. They were cycling through the roster, trying to find a weak link. I didn't answer. I opened a new document titled Times Forensic Audit Summary, the Jason Reynolds Portfolio **. I began to list the findings. *****, embezzlement. Count 1, ****, misappropriation of funds for personal vehicle lease, $14,500. Embezzlement. Count 2, ****, misappropriation of funds for residential lease, $50,400 over 12 months. Embezzlement. Count 3, falsification of business records, invoices for non-existent vendors. Fraud. Providing false financial statements to an investor, Argus Capital, to secure additional funding. At 10:30 a.m., an email arrived from Jason. It was marked high importance. The subject line was confusion regarding Argus Capital. Sarah. It read, Dad told me what you said last night. Very funny. Look, the courier just dropped off some insane legal paperwork. Breach of contract, asset freeze. You need to call off your dogs. Dad is freaking out. He says he signed some personal guarantee back in 2016. You told us that was just standard boilerplate. You can't do this to family. We have vendors waiting on deposits for R&J Logistics. If we don't wire the money by noon, we lose the warehouse lease. Call me now. I stared at the screen. He still didn't get it. He thought this was a misunderstanding he could charm or bully his way out of. He thought the personal guarantee was a formality. I replied, Jason, Please direct all future correspondence to my legal counsel, Mr. Marcus Thorne, regarding the standard boilerplate. Clause 14, Section B of the Master Investment Agreement explicitly states that in the event of malfeasance or misappropriation of funds, the investor, Argus Capital, reserves the right to pierce the corporate veil and seek restitution from all guarantors. Robert Reynolds is the guarantor. The asset freeze is not a mistake. It is a protective measure to prevent further theft. The audit is ongoing. Sarah Reynolds, manager, Argus Capital. I hit send. 20 minutes later, my intercom buzzed. I lived in a secure building with a concierge, but my father had the persistence of a man whose world was collapsing. I checked the camera feed. Robert was in the lobby. He looked disheveled. He wasn't wearing his usual crisp polo shirt. He was in a wrinkled t-shirt and windbreaker. He was arguing with the concierge. I pressed the talk button. Let him up, Michael, I said to the concierge. I unlocked my front door and left it ajar, returning to my desk. I didn't stand up when he entered. I heard his heavy footsteps in the hallway, then the hesitation as he entered the apartment. He had only been here twice in the 4 years I had owned it. He usually complained it was too sterile. Sarah, he said breathless, standing in the doorway of my office. What the hell are you doing? I turned my chair slowly. I am working, Dad. I have a lot of data to process. You froze the accounts, he said, his voice shaking. I went to the bank this morning to transfer the seed money for Jason's new company money I took from my HELOC. Sarah and the teller told me the account is flagged, pending litigation from Argus Capital. That's you. You froze my money. I froze the assets of the guarantor. I corrected him. You co-signed the loans for Brewhaven and Cryptic Solutions. The contracts were clear. If the principal Jason misused the funds, the guarantor is liable. Jason stole over $200,000 of my money, Dad. I am simply mitigating my risk. Stole? Robert scoffed, stepping into the room. Don't be dramatic. He failed. Businesses fail. That's not stealing. Look at the screen, I said, pointing to the monitor. I brought up the BMW lease documents. March 2017. He wired $14,000 of investor capital to a car dealership. He categorized it as brewery equipment. That is stealing, Dad. That is felony fraud. My father looked at the screen. He squinted at the numbers. He was a hardware store manager. He knew how to read a ledger. He saw the dates. He saw the amounts. I watched the denial war with the reality in his eyes. He needed a car for sales calls, Robert muttered weakly. Presentation matters. He bought a luxury car while the business was failing to pay its rent, I said. And look here. I pulled up the Austin apartment payments. $50,000 for a bachelor pad in Austin while he was living in your guest house. Did you know about about that? Robert went silent. He looked at the floor. And in that silence, I found the answer that broke the last tether of my loyalty. He didn't look surprised. He looked caught. You knew, I whispered. You knew he wasn't going to conferences. You knew he was partying in Austin. He's young, Robert defended, his voice rising. He needed to blow off steam, the pressure you put on him, the expectations. I put pressure on him? I laughed. A dry, sharp sound. I was the silent partner, Dad. I asked for nothing. I gave him $600,000 in silence. And you knew he was pissing it away. And you let him. And now, you want to go into business with him? Family only? You want to mortgage your house again to fund his lifestyle? It's different this time, Robert insisted. R&J Logistics is solid. We have a plan. You have a pitch deck with clip art, I said. And you have zero capital, because I froze it. You have to unfreeze it, he pleaded, changing tactics. Sarah, please, if we don't pay the deposit today, the deal dies. Jason, he's fragile right now. He needs a win. If this fails, I don't know what he'll do. He is 38 years old, I said. He is not fragile. He is a parasite. And you are the host. I'm your father, he shouted, slamming his hand on my desk. You owe me respect. You owe me help. I raised you. You raised me to be competent, I said, meeting his gaze. You raised me to fix things. Well, I am fixing this. I am stopping the bleeding. I am not unfreezing the accounts. In fact, Marcus is filing the civil suit this afternoon. We are suing for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and conversion of assets. We are going to depose Jason. We are going to depose you. And unless you want to lose the house for real this time, you are going to stop enabling him. You would sue your own father, he whispered, horrified. I am suing the guarantor of a defaulted loan. I said, Argus Capital is a business, remember? No corporate interference. Just the men of the house. Well, the investor has arrived, Dad, and she wants her money back. He stared at me for a long moment. He looked older than he had last night. He looked smaller. He realized, finally, that the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. He wasn't the patriarch anymore. He was a debtor. You're cold, he said. You're just like your mother. Thank you, I said. Now please leave. I have a meeting with the district attorney regarding the fraud allegations at 2 p.m. I need to prepare. The district attorney? He went pale. Fraud over $200,000 is a felony, Dad. I have a fiduciary duty to report it unless, I paused. Unless what? Unless R&J Logistics is dissolved immediately. Unless Jason signs a confession of judgment admitting to the debt. And unless you sign a document removing him from your will and granting me power of attorney over your finances to ensure you don't bankrupt yourself. That's blackmail, he said. That's a plea deal, I corrected. Take it or leave it. You have until 5 p.m. He left without another word. I watched him walk down the hallway on the monitor. His shoulders slumped. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a heavy, exhausting relief. The context had been laid bare. The discovery was complete. The evidence was overwhelming. Now, we were moving to the climax. At 1 p.m., Jason showed up. He didn't buzz. He tailed a neighbor into the building and pounded on my door until I opened it. He looked manic. His eyes were wild. You think you can ruin me? He screamed, pushing past me into the living room. I built those companies. I put in the sweat equity. You just wrote checks. I wrote checks that cleared, I said, leaning against the doorframe. Unlike yours, I'm going to fight you, he spat. I'll get a lawyer. I'll countersue for predatory lending. Go ahead, I said. I'd love to see you pay a retainer. Oh, wait, you can't, because your accounts are frozen. He stopped. He looked around my apartment, the clean lines, the expensive art, the quiet order of a life built on actual work. He hated it. He hated me for having it. Why are you doing this? He asked, his voice cracking. We were fine. We were happy. You were happy, I said. I was an ATM. Dad is a wreck, he said. He's crying in the car. You broke him. No, Jason, I said, walking to my desk and picking up the file I had prepared. You broke him. You drained him dry for 10 years. I'm just stopping you from finishing the job. I handed him the folder. These are the papers. The dissolution of R&J Logistics, the confession of judgment, and a repayment plan. $500 a month for the next 40 years. It's symbolic, mostly. I know you can't pay $600,000, but I want the debt on the record. I want you to look at it every month and remember that you are not a businessman. You are a debtor. He threw the folder on the floor. I'm not signing that. Then I call the DA, I said, picking up my phone. I have the number saved. Do you want to go to prison, Jason? Federal prison? Because wire fraud across state lines like those payments to Austin is federal. He stared at the phone. He stared at me. He saw the steely and determined look in my eyes. The look of a woman who had spent 10 years in the back office fixing mistakes and had finally decided to fire the management. You're a bitch, he whispered. I'm the CEO of Argus Capital, I said, and you're fired. He picked up the folder. He walked out. I locked the door. I went back to my desk. The silence in the apartment was absolute. I took a deep breath. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the dull ache of the reality. My family was gone. The illusion was dead. But the books were finally starting to balance. I called Marcus. They have the papers, I said. Prepare the filings just in case, but I think they'll sign. You did good, Sarah, Marcus said. It's hard, but it's right. I know, I said. Now let's talk about the tax implications of the write-off. I was already moving on. I was already calculating the next step, because that's what survivors do. We audit the damage, we close the account, and we open a new one. The documents arrived via courier at 4:42 p.m., 18 minutes before the deadline I had set for the destruction of my stepbrother's life, or rather, the destruction of the fantasy he had been living at my expense. The folder was thin. Inside, the ink was still fresh. Jason had signed the confession of judgment management. He had signed the dissolution papers for R&J Logistics. And, most importantly, my father had signed the durable power of attorney, granting me full control over his financial assets. I called Marcus Thorne. "It's done," I said. "File them and execute the lien on Jason's future earnings. I want that $500 a month garnished directly from his paycheck, wherever he lands. You know he's going to hate you forever," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weary approval of a man who had seen too many family wars. "He hated me when I was giving him money," I replied. "At least now his hatred is free of charge." The aftermath was a slow, grinding dismantle of the facade. It wasn't cinematic. There were no more screaming matches in my lobby. There was just the humiliating bureaucracy of failure. 2 weeks later, the BMW 5 Series was repossessed. I didn't order it. The dealership did, once I stopped the payments from the Argus accounts. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Jason had thrown a tantrum in the driveway, screaming at the tow truck driver that there was a banking error. There was no error. There was just gravity. My father's situation was more delicate. I went to his house the following Sunday, not as a daughter visiting for dinner, but as a trustee conducting an asset inventory. The atmosphere was funereal. Sheila sat in the living room, staring at the television, refusing to look at me. She knew. She knew about the money I had poured in, and she knew her son was a fraud, but she blamed me for the exposure. I sat with my father at the kitchen table, the same table where he had planned his empire with Jason just weeks prior. I laid out the new budget. "I have refinanced the house to pay off the HELOC you took out," I explained, sliding a spreadsheet across the oak surface. "Your Social Security and pension are now direct deposited into a managed trust account. You have a debit card with a $2,000 monthly limit for groceries and incidentals. If you need more, you submit a request to me." He looked at the debit card. It was a standard, gray bank card. It wasn't gold. It wasn't platinum. "I'm 65 years old," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of shame and rage. "I'm on an allowance from my child?" "You are solvent," I said, my voice devoid of pity. "You still have your home. You have food. You have heat. That is more than you would have had if R&J Logistics had launched. You were 6 months away from foreclosure." "Dad," I checked the amortization schedules. He didn't say thank you. He picked up the card and put it in his pocket. "Are you happy?" he asked. "You won. You control everything now." "I don't want to control you," I said, standing up. "I wanted to be your partner. You chose Jason. Now, I'm just your auditor." I left the house. I didn't hug him. We didn't exchange pleasantries. The relationship had been surgically altered. The infection was gone, but the scar tissue was thick and numb. Jason's fall was absolute. Stripped of the entrepreneur title and the Argus capital, he was forced to enter the workforce with a resume that was essentially a work of fiction. He couldn't get a job in logistics. I had quietly blacklisted him with the major firms in Houston by sharing the audit results of R&J Logistics with a few key HR directors I knew. It was petty, perhaps, or perhaps it was protecting my industry from a liability. He ended up working sales for a solar panel company that operated out of a strip mall. It was a commission-only gig, cold calling homeowners during dinner. It was a poetic justice I hadn't engineered, but certainly appreciated. The silence that followed in my own life was profound. For a decade, my anxiety had been tethered to their crises. What if the brewery fails? What if Dad loses the house? Now, the tether was cut. I woke up at 6 a.m., drank my coffee, went to my job, and watched my own net worth grow. I stopped working 18-hour days. I started taking weekends off. I bought a beach house in Galveston, not as an investment, not as a rental, but just for me. The resolution arrived 3 years later. I was at a supply chain conference in Dallas, sitting on a panel discussion about risk mitigation in volatile markets. I was the keynote speaker. The room was packed with 500 professionals. I spoke about forensic auditing, about the importance of transparency, about the dangers of emotional investing. After the speech, as I was walking through the hotel lobby, I saw him, Jason. He was wearing a branded polo shirt that was slightly too large, standing behind a booth for a third-tier freight brokerage. He looked older. He had gained weight, and his hair was thinning. He was handing out cheap foam stress balls to disinterested attendees. He was pitching. "We offer the best rates in the tri-state area," I heard him say to a woman who was trying to walk past him. "Family-owned values." He saw me. He froze, his hand extended, holding a stress ball. I stopped. I was wearing a tailored suit that cost $3,000. I looked at him. I looked at the cheap booth. I looked at the desperation in his eyes that used to be arrogance. He lowered his hand. He didn't sneer. He didn't shout. He looked down at his shoes. "Sarah," he mumbled. "Jason," I said. I sent the check this month," he said. "The 500. It cleared, right?" "It cleared," I confirmed. "You have 37 years left." He nodded, defeated. "I'm working on it." "Good luck," I said. I walked away. I didn't look back. I walked out of the hotel and into the bright Texas sun. My driver was waiting. "Where to, Miss Reynolds?" he asked. "The airport," I said. "I'm going home." I pulled out my phone. I opened my banking app. I checked the balance of Argus Capital. It was dormant now, a shell I kept only for the monthly deposit of $500 from Jason. I looked at the transaction history. Deposit, $500, J. Reynolds. Deposit, $500, J. Reynolds. Deposit, $500, J. Reynolds. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about the ledger. It was about the fact that for the first time in our lives, the math was correct. I closed the app. I looked out the window at the skyline. I thought about my father, safe in his house, watching watching TV, living on the allowance I provided. I thought about the family-only dinner. They had wanted a closed loop. They had wanted to keep the outsiders out. I smiled, a small, private expression of peace. I was the outsider, and I was the only one who was free. The silent partner had finally closed the deal.